It's episode 103 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Have you been to hankgarner.com and subscribed to the show yet? Please do, and when you do, leave a comment. And while you're there, check out some of my books. I've released several new stories over the last couple weeks, and I'd love for you to pick some up. hankgarner.com. Before we get into our great interview this week, I'd like to tell you about one of our sponsors, and that's the Association of Independent Publishing Professionals. The AIPP is an organization that helps band together freelancers and people that help support the indie author community. And by that I mean people that do cover design or layout, any of the things that authors need to do what they do. If you are one of the people that provides those services, the AIPP is the place for you. Come join them, get connected. You can network with other people. You can find authors that need your help. And if you're an author like me, you will find someone that has a service that you need. This is a great idea. This is a great place for people to band together and to get their services out there to people who can actually use them. So go to AIPPonline.org and get connected with the people that can help you make better art. Hey writers, if you are anything like me, I know that one of the most frustrating parts about writing and publishing is maintaining all of your marketing. You know, that's where Third Scribe comes in, because at Third Scribe, they believe that authors shouldn't have to be webmasters. Not only webmasters, you shouldn't have to be a marketing guru, a graphic designer, or anything else except a writer. So that's why Rob McClellan and the good guys over at Third Scribe built this awesome platform. And it's a platform that pretty much handles everything for you. So here's how it works. Third Scribe is the premier social marketing tool for successful authors and cutting-edge publishers. As an author, your job is to create worlds, not get bogged down playing webmaster. And Third Scribe ensures every post happens in the most appealing way possible to attract readers, fans, and everyone else that's curious for maximum effect. If you want to create something but don't know how, then you should let Third Scribe's concierge support service meet your needs. Not everyone is born a techie, and we understand that. In fact, Third Scribe wants to be your personal IT staff, so you can spend your time writing, not dinking with your website. Third Scribe will support you so that you can do what you do best, and what you do best is write books and share them with the world. So Third Scribe will handle all that for you in an easy, tailored, and effective manner to ensure maximum sales. So go to thirdscribe.com today, sign up, and let them handle all of your website needs for you, where you can concentrate on being a writer. Thirdscribe.com. Go visit them today. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. As I love to do on this show, I like to bring authors to you that I have recently discovered. And like I've talked about many times before, one of my favorite things to do, at night when I'm laying in bed or whatever, is to take my Kindle and start just kind of digging around through the Kindle store and looking for new things that I'm not familiar with and that intrigue me. And I came across this author, Jeff Wheeler, who is my guest today. And Jeff has a book called The Queen's Poisoner that, when I read the description, I thought, oh, well, this is kind of cool and unique. And so I downloaded it and started reading and kind of fell in love with the book and in love with Jeff's style. And I said, well, I've got to reach out to this guy and see if I can get him on the show. So I sent Jeff an email, and I'm always humbled when someone emails me back, and we started a conversation, and I'm extremely happy to have Jeff Wheeler on the show today. Welcome, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Hank. It's great to be here.
Jeff, I always start interviews with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
My first memory goes back to junior high school because I was, I read lots of different things, but I remember just borrowing a Terry Brooks novel from the library. It wasn't even his first novel; it was his second one, The Elfstones of Shannara. And
Terry's been the gateway drug for a lot of people.
I know, and I got hooked early because as I started reading it, I started predicting, oh, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and then nothing I thought was going to happen happened.
Right.
It kept me up late at night, and I even grabbed my brother and shook him awake, saying, "You got to hear what happened," and he's like, "Just let me sleep," and so I read that and I distinctly remember having the feeling of, I want to be able to create stories that make people feel the way I'm feeling now. And, it took a while to get there, but that kind of lit the fire, kind of, ignited it and started it burning. So it was clearly a clear memory. It was that book, and it was that time.
Elfstones is this interesting book that was the entry for a lot of people into his work, and being the second book, you would think that it wouldn't really stand on its own, but that was not not the case. I think my first Terry Brooks book was Elfstone. That's interesting.
Yes, and I've met him a couple of times, and he's told me that that it seemed to be the entrance point for a lot of people. That I went back and read Sword of Shannara too, and enjoyed it, but it didn't grab me as much and make me a fan as much as Elfstones did.
Did you ever read his biography?
Oh, of course.
I'm grasping for the name of it, and I'm losing it. But
Sometimes the Magic Works.
Yes, Sometimes the Magic Works. Yeah. What a fascinating look into a writer's journey, and especially for someone, I guess that was about 4 decades ago when he's telling the story of Sword of Shannara and that whole process. Anyway, that's a recommendation for all the listeners to go pick up Terry Brooks' biography.
Absolutely, I recommend it as well.
Yeah. So you're in junior high and you pick up this book. Were you a fan of fantasy novels before that, or was this your first experience?
It was my first, one where it really, really hooked me. The only other book I had read, or series I had read before that, was in elementary school. I read the Lloyd Alexander, The Chronicles of Prydain, and that one was like, these are pretty good stories, and I liked them, but it didn't light it enough to go get a bunch of other books and to start reading other writers. But after reading Terry Brooks, I definitely did. I started exploring other authors and just started, voraciously reading different things. So I definitely, I consider it kind of the first, because I went back and read the Prydain Chronicles again and still enjoy them, but it didn't quite tip me over the edge.
Gotcha. So when you kind of had this fire lit in you after reading Elfstones, what did you consciously make an effort to say, okay, I'm interested in this, I'm going to start pursuing this, or was it just this thing that was just awakened and it just kind of stayed in the back of your mind?
Well, it burned enough because when I was, I think in my 8th grade year, my dad bought an Apple IIe computer. Now I imagine you can appreciate that, but I was pretty geeked out over having my own computer, at least not mine, but family had it. And it came with a word processor, which he got, and I took a word processing class in 8th grade. Technology is so old, but it makes me laugh. But once I had the tools, because the thought of like handwriting out a story, just I've never been interested in doing that. But the thought of being able to type it, because I've always been a fast typist, and the thought of doing that. So it was my freshman year in high school that I started writing my first book, and I wrote a trilogy, but it wasn't fantasy. Back then, I started thinking about writing. I was kind of into comic books and things, and so I kind of wrote a thriller, a trilogy of a thriller. And I did that, and then I wrote a kind of a more of a modern day thriller, and then I wrote kind of a military thriller. So I wrote 5 books throughout my 4 years of high school. And so I kind of started developing that self-discipline of just, when I'm done with my homework and I'm done with stuff, I'm going to spend some time writing. I always had kind of fantasy stories in my head, but the stuff I was kind of cutting my teeth on was kind of a different genre. And of course, it's all garbage. But I ended up submitting one or two of my stories to a publishing company in New York when I was a teenager, and of course they very politely rejected me, and I still have those original rejection notices. But I just kind of had this ambition of, I'm going to write books someday, and I'm gonna keep going. But I did it throughout high school, and it really kind of got me going.
What do you think that did for you? Taking that desire and actually, going through the mechanics of it. Do you think that even though you got rejections, which, most of us do in the beginning, and a lot of us writers kind of carry those as badges of honor. Do you think that that solidified your desire, or, did you, I guess what I'm getting at is how did you handle the rejection? Had you put in enough time that you said, okay, I know I'm good, or I know I'll get good, or did you kind of have the idea, oh man, I put all this work and time into it, and now they don't appreciate it? How did you handle it, especially as such a young person?
You could ask my wife, and she'll tell you that I've always had a stubborn streak to me. So tell me no, and it's more likely to still happen that way. So being rejected actually, made me feel good. It's like, hey, they read it, or at least they read a piece of it, and that's another step forward. So being told no, just if anything, just cemented the desire to do it. One of the interesting things, we all need sometimes prodding in our life, and I had enough friends and stuff in high school that read some of my work and liked it, and then I had a great set of parents who told me that you will never be a writer. I mean, go get a real job, go get a degree that you can use, do something, but don't be a writer, because that you're not going to be able to make a living out of it. And that's probably what I needed to hear, because I just kind of put a little steel in my spine, because I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not. You think I can't do this, huh? And it just, I know their intention was, to ground me in the reality that most people can't make a living out of their writing. But I think it kind of emboldened me to prove them wrong, and it's been nice to have been able to do that. But the rejection, it actually was motivating. It motivated me to want to do better and to do it. But it became difficult as the rejection slips piled up, as they tend to do the more you send them out.
Which is interesting, because the vast majority of people I've interviewed that I ask that type of question to, and I guess it makes sense that if the kind of people that accept rejection and change careers and go, be an engineer or plumber or policeman or fireman or something important like that, I wouldn't be interviewing them. But there's this great sense that writers just get kind of ticked off and accept that as a challenge and say, oh, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I see that over and over and over again. I'm not sure if we are an extremely determined bunch, or, if we have something wrong with us.
I think it might be a mental disorder sometimes.
I think so.
There are those similarities between us, and when you hang out with other authors and you're like, oh yeah, we're we're quite kind of similar. We have these stories in our head, and they don't shut up, and we have to tell these stories, and
right.
There's a lot of commonalities between us. So
I think so too. So how did you start pursuing that? So the conventional wisdom is you'll never make it. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people write books every year, and they don't get published, and all of that. How did you take that determination that you had, and that stubbornness and hard-headedness, as we say in the South, and push forward with that? How did you decide? Okay, I'm going to do this, and this is the path I'm going to take.
Well, I made that decision in college. So I went to San Jose State. There's a plug for my university. I went there, and I was a history major. I was not an English major because I really hate grammar and all the rules. But I love history, and I can quote you the kings of England from William the Conqueror to Richard III, and just from memory, because my brain is always organized. It's been quick to organize facts like that. So yeah. I love studying history. I took all the creative writing classes that I could while I was in college, and it was one of in fact it was one of my professors. I'd written a short story assignment called The Wishing Lantern, and he just wrote this little comment on the paper after I got it back, and he gave it an A, and he just said, "This would make a great children's story," and that kind of feedback. And so I actually, while I was after I'd gotten my degree, and while I was actually working in industry, working for Intel in the Bay Area, I got the idea to self-publish. Now, by self-publishing, I mean this was before Kindle. This was 1998, 1999. I actually pulled together some friends, and I bankrolled the project, hired an artist, and made a hardcover children's story called The Wishing Lantern, which you can still find a couple copies left at a one-time run. And it was one of those fire and then aim kind of things.
Right.
I was so excited I could create it, but then the whole infrastructure of how do you get people to buy these, and I sold them to family and friends and coworkers and anyone that would take it. And so here's this print physical thing that costs thousands of dollars to produce, and yet to get it into bookstores was nearly impossible. That was very discouraging, but it was I really tried self-publishing back before it was even, economically viable to do that. And, my wife still kind of scratches her head sometimes, like, why did we do this again? But I learned a lot from that experience. One of the things I learned is that, bookstores look for publishers. They want respected publishers. And I kind of came to the idea as I kept getting these rejection letters from publishing companies that, as I worked on my MBA after my history degree, it's like, the publishing is a business, and, the people they're publishing are the authors that have been financially viable. That works. So it's really hard for a new author to break in. And so I kind of came to the conclusion that if I got an audience, then a publisher would want me. So all the rejections would just show that the economics made it very unlikely to happen. So I thought, well, how am I going to get an audience? So that's when I decided to create with these same friends an e-zine called Deep Magic, and we launched it back in 2002 and said, we're going to publish sci-fi and fantasy stories, and let's do this. And I thought that process would help me find that audience that would be able to make it more viable to a publisher. So that was kind of my thinking and how that kind of came about.
So what was this project that you launched? Tell us a little more about it.
So Deep Magic was a monthly e-zine. We did it in PDF format. This was before Kindles and
right.
and iPads and things like that. This was before social media, so we created a website and we're just trying to have people find us. But we published every month, and we would find anybody willing to submit to us. We didn't pay anything at the time. But one of the things I did was similar to you, Hank, is I went and contacted some of my favorite authors and asked them to write articles for us on the craft of writing. And so I would just tap all my favorite ones, and they were very pleasant. Most of them did respond favorably. We got Robin Hobb, we got Terry Brooks, we got many different folks. We even got Brandon Sanderson back when his first book came out, The Launtress, before anybody even knew who he was, and I interviewed George R. Martin back when Song of Ice and Fire first came out, before any of that stuff. I interviewed him, and it was just all fun. And I would ask them the questions that I wanted as an author. I wanted to know the answers to. So I kind of used them as my tutors to kind of do things. Then we'd publish these articles. So we published for 4 years, 49 issues. And then we finally shut down, 10 years ago because of the time commitment. My friends and we all had families and young families and so many different places and careers and things. And the time just became so much that we just couldn't do it. We really wanted to be a professional e-zine, but we just couldn't quite pull together enough of the finances to make that happen. So we decided to shutter the doors in 2006 and conclude our final issue.
And I know you have some exciting news about that that we'll follow up on in just a minute. But I want to dig into this just a little bit. I personally don't think that there's any better education or on-the-job training, if you want to look at it that way, for a writer than to talk with other writers and to listen to other writers tell their stories, because a couple of things that you'll quickly learn is that they will begin to dispel some of the rumors and conventional wisdom about writing, because as soon as someone sets down hard and fast rules about how to do something, if you talk to 5 different writers, you're going to get 5 different stories about how.
Stories and opinions.
Right. So you learn. Sometimes you learn very specific information that's helpful, but you also learn to trust your judgment and to trust your own creative process and things like that. That had to be a fascinating experience for you. And how did it help your original goal of wanting to help your own publishing career by networking with these folks and by learning from them? How did that help your process going forward?
Well, it really, one of the things that I really learned from the experience, Hank, was getting the editor's point of view, right? Because the people are submitting the slush pile to me now, and after reading so many stories that all sound the same and have kind of similar things, it gave me an appreciation for what these editors go through, and that's why agents exist, to be able to filter through the wheat from the chaff and to say what needs to be there. So it kind of really showed me that there are things that are just regurgitated over and over again. So it really helped crystallize in my mind that I need to tell stories that are kind of have unique spins or unique things. What I found is Deep Magic took so much of my time that I wasn't able to do a lot of my own writing. I was helping other people get published, but I wasn't able to work on my stories. So right after we shut it down, I mean within a year or so after that, Terry Brooks came to the Bay Area to teach a writing class. Now I was there. She's like, I had to be there.
Oh yeah.
I told my wife, I saw this in the mailbox. I'm like, look, I'm going to be at this class. Here, I get to spend a day with Terry Brooks. What's not to like about that? So not only did I get to spend the day with him, but I got to give him a sample of a novel that I had been working on, during my Deep Magic days, and get feedback from him in the class. And it was just such a golden opportunity. So I would have driven across the country to get that, but I was able to just drive locally and be able to go do that. And spending a day with him was wonderful. First, not only did I get to have lunch with him, just him and me, that was just like a dream come true. Just being able to have a little lunchtime chat in a cafe with your favorite author, that was awesome.
Yeah.
But when we got to the feedback, he'd given me the feedback, during the session, and then during lunch, he kind of looked at me and just said, Jeff, you're the best writer in this class. You've got you've got a lot of potential here, and that was just the boost of confidence that I needed. But he taught us a principle in the class, that million-word rule that he attributed to Stephen King. And you've probably heard of it. That after you've written your first million words, then you're ready to be a writer. And on my way home, as I was driving from that, those words, kicking around in my head, I said, I wonder how many I've written. All those high school novels, all the stuff I did in college, all the stuff I did for Deep Magic. I wonder how much that is. And I got home and I did some math and just kind of played around with, okay, how many words per page, blah blah blah, and I added it all up, and it was like 985,000 words. And I kind of stared at that. I'm like, really? Like, all this experience, all of these years that I've been doing this while working on a job and going to school and all these things, has that been preparing me? And so the very next thing I wrote was The Wretched of Muirwood, which is the book that I wrote that has really, that's what got noticed by Amazon Publishing. That's what got the deal. I mean, it all came true because of that. And I'm now I'm past my second million words since that. But
nice.
that experience of doing Deep Magic and meeting Terry Brooks in person kind of helped solidify. And I said, you know what? I tried again and again. I submitted to over 40 agents, when I finished this Muirwood series, and not a one. I said, I'm going to self-publish this thing, and I'm going to do what I thought that I needed to do. I'm going to go find my audience. I'm going to go build the audience myself, because now we have Kindles, now we have social media, now we have all these other tools, and I'm going to give this a try again. And I published all three simultaneously, so that these binge readers that don't like waiting, it's like boom, you could read 1, 2, 3 all at a time, and then the feedback started coming in very favorably, and it was like, okay, glad I did it.
So you didn't have any trepidation about self-publishing again after the experience you had the first time? Had the landscape changed so much that it was not even a consideration?
It was a consideration, of course. I mean, everyone's plagued by these doubts and things like that, but I was just more determined to get it right this time.
Yeah.
And Amazon created the tools. I didn't have to go create a bookstore. I didn't have to go create. It's like I didn't even know how to. I didn't need to know how to format a book. They had a company called CreateSpace that could do the formatting and do all of that stuff. So the infrastructure was created by somebody else, and they then created the bookstore and the platform. So I mean, the timing of that couldn't have been more ideal to hit that kind of first wave of as self-publishing hit Kindle. I was part of that first wave, and it was nice to have 3 books already written by that point to be able to jump on into the ocean. So I was nervous, but I still had that. I'm not going to fail. I'm just going to keep trying until I get this thing right, and I'm going to learn something from this experience, and hopefully build a readership that appreciates the kind of things, stories that I tell.
Yeah, and it really is a no-brainer for an author to self-publish, especially like you said that Amazon's built the tools, and there are other players in the market, but obviously Amazon is kind of the 800-pound gorilla when it comes to publishing now. And we've heard many stories of people that have self-published and then decided to sell rights to a Big Five publisher and go that route. So the stigma of the vanity press, as it used to be called with derision, a lot of that stuff is just disappearing. It's just not the same anymon
You're absolutely right, and there was a stigma for it, and you've seen since the KDP platform, Kindle Direct and things. There's a lot more people in the market now, and it's affecting everybody. It affects me. It affects other self-published authors. It affects the Big Five. That there are so many people trying to jump in at the same time. It's changing the dynamic. So things today aren't the way they were just a couple of years ago, and so You can't expect the status quo to just stay the same. It's going to change, and writers starting right now are going to have to come up with and invent different approaches. But at the end of the day, finding your audience, finding people willing and wanting to pay to read your book I think is still a pretty good strategy. There just might be different ways of achieving that strategy, 10 years from now than there is today.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about your leaving Intel to do this full time. But before we can get there, how did you get to Intel? How did you go from this high school kid that wanted to be a writer to working for a semiconductor manufacturer?
Okay, I'll try to tell you the short version of the story. So I finished high school. I went on a mission for my church for 2 years, and when I got back from my mission, one of the experiences I had is I actually worked in the mission office for 6 months, where I was helping the mission president, working in the office. I told you I was a fast typist, right? That kind of played a role. And I got to learn the different software and things like that. So when I got back from my mission and was starting college, I needed a job. So I just went to a temp agency, and I typed so fast that it kind of blew their minds. They're like, "Wow, this kid can type. And do you know these software packages?" I'm like, "Yeah, I learned them, on my mission, and I've been using computers since I was a kid." And so they said, "Well, we've got this job over here at Intel. Just a temporary thing. They're looking for somebody in their training department. And we think you'd be a good match. Do you want to give it a try?" And I'm like, "What's Intel?" What do they do? I had no idea who they were. And I went over there. I interviewed. They accepted me as a temp. Worked there for almost a year. Even as I started school, they just adjusted my work hours to match my school schedule because they just liked the work that I did, and I loved the company. And I ended up getting hired on permanently about a year after starting. So I became an official blue badge. That's versus a contract hire, and I still have that Intel blue in my blood. I worked in the training department, and I worked in another group working with universities, and I worked in the factory night shift as a manufacturing manager, supervising technicians. That was like science fiction right there. That's inspired some of my stuff. Working in an ion implanter is pretty awesome. Seeing how that stuff works. I've worked in IT, I've worked in real estate, I've worked in staffing. I spent 22 years at that company just doing different jobs. I got an MBA after my degree in history, and just really thought that I was going to do that as a career. But it was while I was working at Intel that I did the self-publishing thing, and it was while I was on a conference call with a coworker when an email came into my inbox saying, from an editor over at Amazon Publishing saying, "Hey, I read Wretched and Muirwood and I loved it. I want to talk to you." And I don't even remember the conversation I was having with a coworker because my brain just got hijacked. Looking at this email going, "Really? I didn't even email them. They came and contacted me, because they saw my book in the Kindle store, and they saw the reviews and they saw the sales, and I just thought, it was just totally backwards where they were, submitting to me versus the other way around. It felt like the world had turned on its head.
So, speaking of that book, Wretched and Muirwood, it is presently, it looks like publication date was January of 2015, so almost 3.5 years ago, sitting at 1,750 reviews with a 4.5 out of 5 average for a book that's been around 3.5 years. That's really incredible, especially for a genre that has readers that tend to be very opinionated. Where did the idea for Wretched come from?
Great question. And I get to actually trace it back to my history roots. A lot of my stories have their foundation, or the seed idea came from history books that I've read, either novels or just my own personal studies. And so the story behind the Wretched and Muirwood dates back to the Middle Ages, where the troubles between England and Wales, and there's a lot of things. And there was this there was this girl that was sent to an abbey to live out the rest of her life because of the sins of her fathers and stuff. And this her story just compelled me, and I just found it just gripping. Hearing what led to it, and I thought, this girl ends up staying at this abbey her entire life and just doesn't get to go anywhere, and she died at that abbey. And I just felt so sorry for her. I said, I'm going to write a story that gives her a better ending than the one she got in reality. And so the seed of that idea just came from another history novel that I read, and just doing some research of the time. And so I had to invent my own medieval England and Wales and my own magic system. And what I love about fantasy is you're not constrained by what actually happened. You can kind of do whatever you want. And so it kind of came about that way. And this girl, it just was haunting me. And so as I wrote it, I had this 3-book story arc in my head, and I wrote 1 book a year. It took me 3 years to do it, and it started with the Wretched.
One thing I noticed about your books, and it's kind of one of these things that you really can't quantify, but that your books gave me the feeling of being very anchored, and by that I mean there's lots of fantasy books that seem to be so fantastical that you kind of lose any connection to reality. Your books gave me the feeling that these were definitely anchored in a real time and a real place. Does that make sense at all? And I think that your attention to history and your background in that really solidifies that. Is there ever a conscious effort on your part when you're world building to make these things feel like they could be actual real places and people?
It is absolutely part of what I try to do through how you just describe things, but not overly descriptive. But I get inspired a lot by when I travel. But when I was doing the Wretched in Muirwood, I was picking a setting for it. I chose. I needed an abbey, and I was a medieval English, history major. So I started looking at all these different abbeys in England, and I ended up finding this kitchen, the ruins of a kitchen that's still standing in Glastonbury Abbey. And I just as I was looking for this kitchen where this character was going to be from, and I just saw this distinctive, image on the internet. I'm like, wow, this is beautiful. I said, what does it look like on the inside? So I went and I emailed the caretaker of the grounds, and I said, what does that kitchen look like on the inside? And he actually emailed me pictures of the inside of it, and I just started exploring around the grounds kind of virtually, and just started studying the history of Glastonbury and all these things. And so as I was creating the story, and as the characters would, as the main character left the abbey finally, I would peruse old maps of what was around back then, and where might be some places that she might have found or might have gone. And so I really tried to make it real, so that if a visitor visited these places, I would want them to be like, this reminds me of Muirwood. In fact, just like last week, I got an email from a fan who was telling me that she was reading The Scourge of Muirwood, sipping a cup of coffee in the village of Penarth in Wales, which I had just mentioned in the book. And, I actually called the name Penarth, which was the name of the real town. But she's like, I'm sitting here in this town reading the story that you wrote about this location. She thought that was just funny. And I cracked up myself because, a lot of these places are real. I've just sometimes twisted the names or changed the names. But in almost all my stories, they're based off of something that is very real to me and has now become real to my readers.
When you're thinking about these places, you talked about magic systems earlier. I interviewed R.A. Salvatore a couple of weeks ago. He was on the show, and he talked about fantasy readers and the expectation of tropes and things like that. And he cautioned that when you're writing fantasy, to be very careful with how you treat the tropes, so that when you when a reader comes to your books, they're not expecting certain characters to behave a certain way, but you've decided to flip the genre on its head and do something new. So he talked about having to find ways to do new things without messing with the typical tropes. Right, yeah. So when you're building a magic system, there's a lot of different magic systems that have been created, and everyone's always looking for some new twist and some way to kind of anchor this fantastical magic into something that makes sense. Do you have a process that you go through when you're dreaming up a new world and a new story?
The process, not so much, but more like guidance. And this I learned from that Terry Brooks class that I mentioned earlier, that I kind of ascribe to his philosophy, or at least what I recall it to be, that it needs to make sense. That you power needs, or magic needs, it needs to be logically consistent. That if you're going to make it something, make sure you're consistent about it, because it's the inconsistency that rattles a reader. And so when I set about with my worlds creating something, I try to ground it in something. So, for example, for Muirwood, I grounded it in two different things that I kind of wove together as the inspiration. One is, if you read like the Bible, the Old Testament or the New Testament, or even if you read medieval literature, it reads like a fantasy novel. I mean, they believed in magic. They believed that miracles happen. They believed in dragons. They believed in powers that could happen. I've read many historical documents that talk about these things. And so when I was creating the magic system for Muirwood, one of the constraints I gave myself is, any power that you demonstrate in this world, you need to have read it somewhere before, like in the scriptures or in a historical thing where you can kind of point back to it and say, these are kind of the rules based on what other people have discovered about it. And so, like, for example, in my books, they have these stones that have these faces carved on them. And if you use the magic, they can suddenly, water will start gushing out of these stones. These stones are called lyrics. Well, that dates back to Moses in the Old Testament,
the Exodus,
right? Where he had water come out of a rock. And so, I think readers, either they know that or they go, oh, this is interesting. So that was one constraint I put on myself. The other constraint I put on myself is I was inspired by a not fantasy book, but a book by the author Napoleon Hill called Think and Grow Rich. And it was about the power of our thoughts. And I've read that book like almost every year since I first read it. And it's about the power of, about having a positive mental attitude and things like that. And I fully subscribe in those things. And so I wove those together where the magic of the Muirwood world, it comes through people's thoughts, where they can cause things to happen. It's the positive intent can allow these things to happen. So I think what a lot of authors do is they take maybe disparate elements and they kind of weave them together in a different way. And so I did that for Muirwood. I did a different thing for my Merowyn books, and I've done a different thing for my King Fountain books. So part of the world building is thinking about, okay, what's the principle behind this magic, and how am I going to constrain myself so that it's limited and not unlimited? And I like playing within boundaries, because that kind of forces my creativity to, find new ways of doing things, and hopefully that new way is satisfying to a reader.
Yeah. So you're working at Intel, and you put out the 3 Muirwood books simultaneously. How did you let the world know that your books were out there, or did you just kind of depend on Amazon, and kind of what was your strategy when launching those? My strategy was pretty simple. It's like, I still believe that word of mouth is the best, form of marketing. That if somebody loves the book, they're going to tell somebody about it. So I was grateful that we had social media, and so my strategy was, I had some family and friends who had been reading the Muirwood books,
And they said, I want to share this with my friend, but I can't because it's a big Word document, like,
Yeah.
can I share it with them? Like, no, I'm not comfortable with you handing it out. And I was very just selected. Only let a handful of people give them permission to read it. And a friend of mine from high school, that I went to school with, asked to read it, and I said, okay, I'll let you take a look at it. And she wrote back and just said, this is just as good as any other fantasy novel that I've read. You should, I'd pay money for this. And I'm like, I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna put it in the form factors, whether print or Kindle version or whatever. And so I did that, and it was out for about a year, a little bit less than a year, but about a year when, those copies, and the sales were doing okay, but nothing crazy. Well, then KDP launched, where they said, Kindle Select, if you're exclusive with the Kindle platform, will enable you to give your book away for free for just a couple of days during the 3-month period.
Yeah.
I looked at that and I kind of scratched my head. And I said, I don't see the downside here, right? If the secret is word of mouth, and you can now suddenly get your book into the hands of more people who then, if they like it, will tell people, I don't see the downside of this. So I signed up just for the first book. I said, let me just try this out. And I just did that. And over 10,000 copies moved that first time.
Crazy.
And I still remember when I checked the next day, how did I do? I was speechless. I walked into the kitchen to tell my wife, and I couldn't even talk. I just gestured for her to come back to the den. You got to see this. Come here. And she looked at there, and her eyes bugged out. What? Over 10,000 copies. And those 10,000 copies, and then the other freebies that I gave away, led to more sales than the entire year combined of people, just my family and friends. And so having that platform really, started getting that ball moving. And it was literally 4 months after that the email came from Amazon Publishing, because that enough people had been reading it, the reviews were high, and the sales, it just kind of, it ended up on somebody's screen, and they're like, oh, what is this? And they read it, and they liked it. And just like what happens, I really think that if you write a good story, people are going to tell their friends about it, and that's the kind I try to write.
Yeah, absolutely. And the books are still doing well. I mean, you're still finding new readers. So that's awesome. That's the great thing about self-publishing, especially is, with traditional publishing, sometimes books get a fairly short shelf life if they don't, do gangbusters right out of the gate.
Exactly.
But you have that ability to just let new people find it as they will. That's amazing. So you wound up leaving Intel to do this full time. How did that come about?
So after I got that email from Amazon, and they said, hey, we're interested in talking to you. Their 47 North imprint had only been around for a few months. So a lot of my story is just timing, right? They contacted me and they said, we're interested in acquiring your Muirwood series. What else are you working on? And I said, well, I'm actually working on another trilogy. And they're like, another trilogy? And so I actually signed a 6-book deal with them. So they republished Muirwood. They gave it a better edit. They put on new covers. They did the audiobook. They did the whole thing. And then we also signed up the book, for the next 3 books. And so because I was working full time, I was only comfortable committing to delivering 1 book a year. Because I wasn't sure how things were going to go. After that first year of, after they published Muirwood plus the first book of the, Fireblood, the new series, I knew I could have left. I could have left right then and there. But I'm very cautious and I'm very conservative. And I didn't want to rush and make a decision. And so we went through the other 2 books. And as I saw that I finished those 2 books, I said, you know what? The financials are such, this could work out. And I went back and I pitched my next idea to them. I said, I want to go back and write back in Muirwood again. Well, I've got another 3 books I could do in this series, but let's do something different. Let's do it like we did with the original. Let's do these 3 books 3 months apart, not all together, but 1 month apart, and really accelerate the launch and do that. And I love working with 47 North because they're very open to doing creative and different things. And they said, we love the idea. So they pitched, they made an offer in the book, which allowed me to basically tell my boss that I'm leaving Intel. Because I need to be able to write full time in order to deliver those 3 books on schedule. And so I had enough royalty coming in from the other 6 books that I'm like, I feel confident we can make this work. And then, I did the 3 books with them, and then they signed me up for the King Fountain series. So it's just, they've been a great partner to work with. But it was that ability to have 3 books come out in a year that changes the game for me to be able to say, yeah, I can write that fast. If you can publish that fast, we've got a good partnership, and I don't need to self-publish this stuff. Let's continue this partnership with 47 North.
What an exciting story. So now that you do this full time, what's your process like now? I know for when you're beginning, like a lot of us, we're working a full time job. We're trying to maintain our family and hopefully do better than just maintain our family, but actually be an active participant. And for a lot of people, just being present for their family and working a full-time job is just about all that people can do, and I completely understand that. I do. But then to add a project like writing a novel, and then to from writing a novel adding I'm going to build a writing career on top of that, it is no easy feat. So now that you have graduated to being able to do this full time, how has that changed your writing process and your publishing process and your ideas about the business of what you do?
Well, to have it make sense, everything you just described is very real. It was giving me post-traumatic stress, just
right
listening to it, because I know what it's like to do that. And what made my case even more challenging was not only was I working full time, and I have 5 kids, but
so do I.
I was called to be a bishop in my church. So I had a congregation of several hundred people I had to look after as well. And that was, we have a lay clergy, so it just, it was just more that had to be done. And yet I still needed to write. I think those of us that do it, I love writing. It's the thing that recharges me. So, talking to my wife and figuring this out, I said, I need to write. Writing is what recharges my batteries, that enables me to try to be a good dad, and a good employee, and a good bishop,
right.
All things. I need that creative outlet to do that. And so we worked it out where Wednesday nights, from like 7 to 10 o'clock, that was my writing time, and that was it. It's like that's just, we're going to carve out that time. I'm going to be able to go into the den, and she'll put the kids to bed that night, and I won't take any calls. It's just, I'm going to, kind of quarantine myself in there. And that forced me to be very rigorous and disciplined, so that during my commute, I'd be thinking about what am I going to write, so that, during when that week's up and it's time to write that Wednesday night, I could just pour out an entire chapter in one sitting in about 2.5, 3 hours and get it done. And then next week, and then when I, every couple of months, I'd come back and I'd reread what I did to edit it and make it better, but then keep working on the next chapters. I created this cadence where I was able to it just became every week. And for me, that was super important, because it allowed me to prioritize my time. It allowed me to say, I'm not going to watch these television shows. I'm going to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go to the gym so I can work out. It just forced me to be very disciplined to be able to have that time to be able to do it. So that worked out, and now my life's a little bit easier, right? I'm not a bishop anymore. I teach a religion class for high school students right now in the morning, and so I don't have the same kind of time restraints that I did before. But I write 3 days a week: Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I always take off all the other days. I don't write on those days. I write in the mornings typically, and then I work on house projects or go out to lunch with my wife or other friends and just do other things. I'm always home when the kids come home from school, so I can help them with homework and all the stuff like scouts and, different things that they're part of, right? Being a parent, I love that. I don't want my writing to take away from that. So the pace of my life is a lot different now, but I still have that same rigor of these are the times that I write, because I found that style worked best for me. And now writing 3 days a week instead of one, I can produce 3 times the volume that I did before. And I've done it enough now that I'm pretty comfortable with being able to do this.
And one thing I've learned for the last, 8 or 9 months, I've been working from home and writing and podcasting and other things full time. But you still have to be very deliberate with your time. Things will always pop up to get in your way, and I don't mean to be condescending when I say this, but I hear a lot of people say that they just can't find the time to do things, but there's a lot of television and just junk like that has crowded all of our lives, and there's always something you can trim out to find the time if you want to bad enough.
And Hank, my story proves that point, because I had to be very strategic and very targeted and say, no, I don't have time for television. I rarely have time for movies. This is more important to me to be able to do that. And the quote that I always share with other people is, nature abhors a vacuum. That when you have a gift of time given to you, it will get filled up with something. Well, you might as well fill it up with things that you want to do and that you're passionate about doing, because otherwise it's going to get filled up with Facebook and Twitter and lots of other stuff that just waste your time. You got to do it. I'm totally with you. I don't think it's condescending at all. I think it's what a lot of authors have had to do to make it work.
Yeah. So, Jeff, your newest book, your latest release, is called The Queen's Poisoner. It's a fantastic book. I think when I first emailed you, I told you that I had just picked it up, and absolutely love it. And you have a follow-up coming pretty soon. I think The Thief's Daughter is the next one in that series.
Yes, comes out the end of this month.
And then the third in that trilogy will come out in September. Tell us just a little bit about The Queen's Poisoner and the idea for the King Fountain series.
Well, this idea, again, goes back to my history studies again. My master's thesis in history was on Richard III and the War of the Roses, and I've always been fascinated by it. And the idea of the main character, this Queen's Poisoner, actually came from one of the historical documents that I read, that during the politics of the time, there was an account. I read a primary account of this woman who went to France and tried to negotiate peace between, these two brothers and stuff, and it didn't say who she was or anything. And as I just read it, it kindled my imagination to go, wow, this character, and so I kind of based it kind of a mix of the War of the Roses and Charlotte's Web, the story about this this little runt pig who's going to get killed, and somebody tries to save him. So that idea kind of spun together that way, and so it was based on history, and I liked it. But what was challenging for me with this series is I used my point of view character was an 8-year-old boy. And I've never tried doing that before. I've never tried leading a story from somebody so young. And my publisher was very nervous. At 47 North, like, oh, you're taking a risk here, because that's not typical for you. It's not part of the formula of your success. You're doing something differently. And the other thing different about this story is I always tell trilogies, but this is a trilogy that spans over 20 years. That book 1 he's young, and book 2 he's a teenager, and book 3 he's a young adult. And so this main character goes through this giant leaps in chronology that I've never done before. And so how do you in book 2 catch up the readers on the years that they missed, and still answer some of their questions, but still get them into the action quickly? And so it was challenging for me, and so I can tell my publisher was really nervous about it. When they read the first book, I remember I was waiting to hear back, and I was taking my family on a vacation out to Yellowstone, and we were driving through the middle of the desert. And I got an email from my editor who had read it, and he just said, "I love it." He's like, "Absolutely love this book." He's like, "This is the best book you've written." So he's like, "We're excited." And then I gave him book 2 a couple months later, and he said, "This is even better than book 1." He's like, "How did you do that? Book 2 is even better than book 1." And then 3 months later, I gave him book 3, and he said, "How did you do that again?" he's like, each one got better, and he's like, "Wow." He's like, we're gonna launch this with one of the biggest launches they could do. So they decided to do Kindle first, which launched it in Kindle a month before the publication date, just to give it the largest possible audience that it could have. So I felt so privileged that they chose it, but they were super passionate about it, but they were nervous at first. And I'm just grateful that it came together as it did, and it was a different story for me to tell, and I liked the challenge that it was, and I'm glad that I took the risk instead of just trying to repeat some of my past successes. I tried something a little bit new and different, and glad that I did.
Well, and at just over a month from publication date, it's got 813 reviews on it. My goodness.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
It's the trajectory is bigger than the Muirwood series so far. So we're all just going, wow. That's not usual for follow-up books from an author series. So I'm just so pleased that it's resonating with my fans so much, and it's finding new fans to my writing who are now looking at my other books. So it's just been a great blessing.
Absolutely, Jeff, and it couldn't have happened to a better book and to a better guy. I'm super happy for you, and I hope it keeps climbing. And I'm ready for the other 2 books to come out. So I know everybody else is too. Before we go, and this has been an extremely fast hour, but before we go, you've got some exciting news about Deep Magic, your electronic magazine that you talked about earlier. Tell us what's going on.
Well, earlier this year, I gave a lot of thought to all that Deep Magic did for me as an author, all the different writers I got to interview, the experience that I got, and I'd always wanted it to be a professional paying, magazine, to encourage other writers, to give them another way of getting a rejection letter or getting, a paycheck for something. And I really had been thinking about, maybe I should recreate this again. So I went back to the 2 original friends who we've been friends together for many years, and we ran through the first round together, and we just talked about it. We sat down together and we said, "Look, guys, do you want to do this?" And so, this weekend we're actually going to be relaunching our website, and Deep Magic is going to come back. We're going to be a Kindle version magazine instead of a PDF file. We're going to be paying professional rates. We've already got an interview with Brandon Sanderson. We tapped him on the shoulder again, said, "Hey, Brandon, last time we talked to you was 10 years ago. You want to talk to us again?" And I recruited Charlie Holmberg, who's author of the Paper Magician series. She's a fantastic author and one of my peers at 47 North, and I pitched
really cool series too.
Awesome. I pitched it to her and said, "Do you want to be part of the board?" And she said yes. And she's the one who actually got us the interview with Brandon. She's the one who interviewed him. And we just started talking to some of the other authors. We've got some people that I've just known in the industry now submitting writing craft articles, like Anthony Ryan, who wrote Blood Song. He's another self-published story. He's a friend of mine, and he wrote an article. We've got some other names that people would recognize. So we're going to be launching our first issue in June of 2016, 10 years to the month after shutting it down, and we're super excited to be able to offer this again, and just for me to be able to pay back just the experience that it was, and to be able to help other authors find markets, and to be able to promote the kind of fantasy and science fiction that I've always loved.
Love it. Jeff Wheeler, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. I've really enjoyed this hour we've spent together, and please, will you come back on the show soon, and let's talk some more about writing fantasy?
I'd love to do it. Thanks for having me, Hank. Appreciate it.